At the same time, we know full well that the struggle against Daesh is not taking place in a political vacuum. And that is why we are working to promote a fully sovereign, stable, self-reliant, inclusive Iraq that is secure in its borders and able to protect all of its citizens. But the truth is that nothing could do more to bolster the fight against the terrorists than a broadly supported diplomatic process that would begin to de-escalate the conflict and that would give the Syrian people a real choice, not between Assad and Daesh, but between the status quo and something far better and long overdue, a true transition in which responsible Syrians from across the political spectrum will have a voice. That is why another core element of our strategy in Syria is diplomatic. A renewed political initiative, broader and more action-oriented than any previously attempted, to isolate the terrorists and set Syria on the path to peace. Now, this possibility was the focus of meetings in Vienna at the end of last month. Meetings that, for the first time, brought together all the key international interested parties to the very same table. And guess what? It came out with a product. That session produced a communiqué endorsed by every country who attended, countries that don't always agree on much, like Saudi Arabia and Iran, but who do agree that Daesh is evil and that the war in Syria must be brought to an acceptable end as soon as possible. More specifically, the countries represented in Vienna agreed to support Syria's unity, independence, territorial integrity, and pluralistic character. We agreed, all of us, that Daesh and other terrorist groups have to be defeated. We agreed, all of us, that Syria's state institutions should remain intact so we don't have the implosion that we saw in Iraq. We saw, and we all agreed, that the rights of all Syrians, regardless of ethnicity or religious denomination, have to be protected in whatever government comes out. We agreed, all of us, that access for humanitarian relief has to be assured throughout the country, and that will be one of the topics we talk about on Saturday. We agreed, all of us, to increase support for internally displaced persons and for refugees and for the countries that host them. And we agreed, all of us, that the UN should convene members of the Syrian government and the Syrian opposition to develop a plan along the lines of the 2012 Geneva Communiqué, leading to a credible, inclusive, non-sectarian governance, followed by a new constitution, and by free and fair, transparent, accountable elections run under the supervision of the United Nations to the highest standards of elections anywhere in the world. We agreed on that, all of us. And we agreed to explore the possibility of a nationwide ceasefire to be initiated in parallel with this renewed political process. Now, obviously, such a ceasefire does not include Daesh, because our effort to defeat Daesh and the effort of our partners to defeat Daesh will continue until we prevail. In fact, it is precisely through this political process that we can, for the first time, if it works, marshal the support of the entire international community against a single common enemy, Daesh. Now, I want to be clear. The Syrian people will be the validators of this whole effort. UN envoy Staffan de Mistura has met with representatives of more than 230 Syrian groups. Our own special envoy, Michael Ratney, has also been in constant communication with Syrian representatives, and I have met with Syrian opposition leaders myself. So this is not about imposing anything on anyone. We are trying to come together as stakeholders to create a framework which can ignite the United Nations negotiating process. But the Syrians will be the first to tell you that they need help from the international community to get there. And what they especially need is a consensus about how to achieve a political transition that will free them from the stranglehold of extremists on the one side and the stranglehold of a dictator on the other, and allow them to shape their own destiny. Now, I want to underscore, the leaders of the responsible Syrian opposition are not focused on revenge. They have no desire to prolong the war, and they understand that compromise will be required. But at the same time, it's simply not possible to go back to the situation that existed before the conflict began. Who in the world truly believes that's possible? Not after month upon month of indiscriminate violence and torture and bloodshed, not after 40 years of dictatorship. Asking the opposition to trust Assad or to accept Assad's leadership is simply not a reasonable request, and it is literally, therefore, a non-starter. And even if we wanted to, my friends, even if you made the worst deal with the devil, as one says, and said, well, that's what you have to do to try to make this process go forward, I got news for you. It will not stop. Because there are those invested in what has happened and in what has been done to them who see Assad as the critical component of the transition. That's why we are pushing so hard for a real transition. Because without a real transition, no matter how much we want it, the fighting will continue and the war will never end. On this point, I acknowledge that we are still working through with Russia and Iran the question of Assad and his role. It has not been settled, and we acknowledge that. But we believe that through this organic process of Syrians defining the future of Syria, we and our partners believe that we can find a road ahead. We can believe that neither peace nor the defeat of Daesh is possible with Assad in power, and that 4.5 years of bitter civil war has made the position on the Syrian people on this subject very clear. So even while divided on this critical issue, the United States and Russia and other countries involved have decided, wisely I think, not to let that disagreement prevent us from trying to build on the common ground that we have established. Build a legitimate organic negotiating process. Our goal is to develop a timetable for action based on interim steps. The participation of a broad range of Syrian parties, including both men and women, and the kind of political transition that will empower the center against the extremes. Now, I cannot say this afternoon that we are on the threshold of a comprehensive agreement. No. There remains a lot of work to be done. The walls of mistrust within Syria, within the region, within the international community are thick and they are high. But those walls will never be breached unless we make a concerted effort and a creative effort to surmount them. Our meeting at the end of October showed that the agreed basis for action is much wider than many had supposed. And looking ahead, it should be crystal clear that Daesh can never again be allowed to gain any control of territory or even, perish the thought, control of Syria, and equally clear that Assad lacks the ability either to unite, to wipe away the crimes of war, and govern a country or end the war. So if the war is to end, we must find an alternative. That logic is compelling, and it provides a basic unifying principle for our efforts going forward.